Technology 1 FOT150S. My name is Vusim Shaisa, and today we're going to be talking about the raw material and the process. So we have already touched on this subject during our lesson in class. So on the first video session, I would like to revisit some of the things that we spoke about. There will be more videos, short videos, I hope, that will be created for you so that you can be able to grasp the material. So let's look at the content. So the content we will cover an introduction. We'll look at the geometric properties of food materials, physical properties of the raw materials, functional properties of the food raw material, growth properties, mechanization, and the raw materials. We'll also speak a lot about product damage and the factors that we need to consider when during transportation and storage of raw materials. So the aim of this lecture is that you as a student should be able to identify the major properties of importance in the selection of food raw materials, and more importantly, you should be able to discuss the important processing indices of food under geometric properties. Very important. And you should also be able to discuss the importance of physical properties. In this case, we are looking at the color of the food material, the texture, the aero and hydrodynamic properties. Frictional and surface properties of the raw materials will also be taken into consideration when selecting food before processing. So it's very important that you are also able to discuss the functional properties of food raw materials with respect to the defects that affect the process suitability. So, food processing is seasonal in nature, both in terms of the demand for the products, in this case, for example, the final product, and the availability of the raw material. So in this case, the demand for its output, we mean, for example, that products such as ice cream, these products are mostly consumed in summer. So meaning the demand for ice cream in winter is going to be less compared to in summer. And also in terms of the availability of its raw material, so the availability, this is affected by the weather conditions. So we know that in some seasons we do not have certain crops, so food processing is seasonal in these two regards, both in nature in terms of the demand for the products and the availability of the raw material. So why do we have to know this? So that you as a food processor, when you are planning ahead your production, you should take these into consideration. Right. Another explanatory example that we can look at is that in the fruit canning industry, so the fruit is grown and is harvested on a seasonal basis. And this is why you find that even considering the planning for labor, we know that especially as people from the Western Cape, you normally hear that people are going to work in the farms. They're going to harvest grapes during a certain period of time. So they will then have jobs during that period of harvesting. Then afterwards, then there's no jobs and stuff like that. So in the fruit canning industry, we know that the fruits are harvested on a seasonal basis. For example, grapes, peaches, apples, etc. However, the canned fruit is consumed all year round with varying demand. Also here, the demand is varying. So we go to ShopRite, now and then, you'll always see there's canned fruit. And this is where you fit in as a processor of food products. So when we look at processing things like canned peaches, canned guavas, these things are available throughout the year. And this is made possible by people like you who are food scientists, right? So we also know that although milk can be produced throughout the year, but there are peaks and the variation in the chemical composition of the milk that is produced by cows. And we also know, just think, for example, now it's winter. I was just thinking, most people accustomed to eating soups, right? So you find that a lot of people will be buying lentils, beans, samp, and beans because this is the season where people are eating mostly these types of foods. And then things like salad dressings, ice creams, the demand is low for these type of food products. So Zweli, if you look at producing food products, then you must then have a plan or an idea on the raw material that you are using, right? So you need to know when is the raw material available, so that influences your processing of your food raw material. In an ideal world, the food processor prefers that his raw materials should be available continuously in sufficient quantity and quality to enable the plenty round operation, as I've said. You want your raw material to be always available in the quantities that you require and in the quality. And quality is very important as far as processing is concerned. And how do we define quality? So quality includes a wide-ranging concept and is determined by many factors. In this case of raw materials and process, we can say quality is a composite of those physical and chemical properties which govern its acceptability to the user, right? So if a person buys a certain product, be it Nike shoes, Adidas shoes, or even a smartphone, you require a certain level of quality. So you as the user, there are certain features that you are looking for. Same applies with the raw materials that we manufacture. We want the color to be a certain degree. We want the texture to be a certain firmness. We want the sweetness at a certain level. So all these things should give us an indication, should be always be consistent when you are buying your raw materials, because obviously that's going to affect the final product that you're going to manufacture. So as a processor, you would want then the quality to be continuous so that you can be able to plan a year-round operation. And most importantly, you also want the materials that you're purchasing to be stable during storage. So in some cases, you may purchase stuff, let's say, for example, in January, but you're going to start processing or you're going to start using that in March. So you want these raw materials, when you are storing them, to be stable. You don't want to store a raw material, then you find out at a later stage, then there's mold growth or there's microbial growth, or maybe the protein has decreased, or maybe the starch has decreased. You want your material to be the same. So you also want the material to have to be uniform in characteristics. So you don't want to have some, for example, some beans in your coffee. Some they are very bitter, some they are very sweet, but it's the same batch. Okay, so you want all your beans. If it's bitterness, the level of bitterness should be the same. So that's what we mean by uniform in characteristics. And the processor also prefers its raw material to be predictably priced. So you don't want to go to ShopRite today. You're buying, for example, potatoes. They are 12 rands, and you are producing Gaspies or potato chips for the students at CPUT. But when you go again 2 months down the line, you find out now the price of potatoes which you bought 1 kg last month or 2 months ago, it was 15 rand, now you go there, it's 30 rands, right? So you want to be able to predict the price of your raw materials. However, in practice, the supply problems associated with raw materials stemming from the criteria above, this is what needs to be overcome by the food processor. And this is the aim of this lecture, is that we should then be able to have markers that we can use in order to determine what is it that we are looking for in a raw material when we're purchasing, and what is it that we can measure to say that this raw material meets this criteria that we have. So, process suitability is therefore determined by a balanced assessment of its properties. One is the availability of the raw material. Is the raw material available? The geometric properties of the raw material, the physical properties, chemical properties, growth, mechanical, and even thermal and electrical properties. What we need to understand, therefore, is that the relative importance of these factors and their contribution to the process suitability index will vary depending on the raw material, the process applied to it, and the end product that is made from it. So all these factors, they are very important. However, this depends on the raw material that you have. For example, if we have butternut versus carrots, so in terms of geometric properties here, we may not necessarily look at the same, right? However, we still need to have some degree of control in terms of the geometric properties. I mean, for example, if you're going to be producing a butternut juice versus a banana juice, a butternut is a product that is very hard in texture, and bananas can also be soft. You understand? So, in terms of the geometry of the product, they are not the same. So, the raw material determines, therefore, how you are going to handle and treat the raw material, and also influence your process that you are going to subject it to. So the aim of this lecture then, which is chapter 3, is that we are going to look at these factors in detail.